Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of What the Future um, with myself, Brandon, and Sam here. Sam, how you doing today?
What's up?
What's
I'm really
up?
excited about this episode.
Me too. This is a fun topic. I think it'll be a little bit different for people. We've covered a lot of different areas of tech, a lot of different areas of um, industry, covering the future and today and present and past, and talking about a lot of history. But today we're going to be talking about the topic of death itself. Bear with us here because it is a bigger industry than you probably imagine. In particular, we're going to talk about death tech today. It's I'd say relatively new field more so in the light of it's getting more popular, but it's something that has kind of been around for a long time. And I think you guys will get a better idea for it as we start getting into the history of it. But death tech is something that's more around the sphere of technology enabled applications or devices to assist in death, the funeral industry, memorialism, things kind of in that nature. And there's a lot of technologies that are incredibly beneficial, but there's also a lot of things that are borderline questionable. And we're going to talk about those today as well. But first, we're going to dive into a little bit of the history of it. I think it'll give a little bit more context into what death tech has looked like in the past, and we'll give a little bit of a preconceived notion of what it is like today. Sam, do you want to kick us off a little bit with some historical facts?
Sure. I feel like I'm not the best for history because I'll be here for like 3 hours talking about the history of humanity. Um, I'll try to keep it short this time because really the point of sharing a historical context for anything when we're thinking about the future is just to show that there has been precedent in humanity and humankind and human cultures. So the future is very similar to the past, and we can learn from the past, the present, and kind of see where we're going. But really, since the dawn of human civilization are actually one of the markers of where we shifted, or a culture, as an anthropologist or historian might study um, ancient human civilizations, was that if a group of people had some sort of ritual or rite of passage for death, so some sort of ceremony, or some, you'd find artifacts or pots or gifts in a tomb or something. This kind of indicated that there was some sort of in quotes civilized society or social society. So again, technology to assist in the transition to the afterlife in some cultures has been around forever. We think of ancient Egypt. I think most people watching here are familiar with a mummy. Oh, good. Thank you. You read my mind. We've got
Mummification. I'm on it today.
good. Early embalming practices, right? And I'm sorry, I make light of very dark things. So I will insert here if
Look at this
I
guy.
don't
He's been all tucked in very nicely for thousands of years. He looks so comfortable.
if any of this stuff, if death is triggering for you, or you have bad thoughts or things, don't watch this episode. And I'm not making light of something that is obviously a very big and important transition that we all do. But anyways, yes, we're familiar with mummification, early embalming practices. So really the idea then of removing some of the bodily fluids to prepare for the afterlife. I think this is the Han Dynasty in China that you're showing. So ancient Chinese were made these burial suits made out of jade to protect the body from decay. And then we had other techniques in medieval Europe as well. So some of these things that became more modern science, right? When we started to invent the field of medicine and science. And this was an example of, again, embalming practices there. So again, in terms of the transition of what to do with the person's physical form, a lot of this was tied to different either religious or spiritual belief systems, and again, assisting the transition into the afterlife. In the case of modern science or modern medicine, I'd say it became a bit more scientific and more for purposes of cleanliness or preventing disease in local soil or water systems. But again, really, that's just to set up the precedent for this show that as long as we've been living, like as human beings, we've also been dying. And there's a long history of things that we've done in terms of rites of passage, rituals, technologies, belief systems that have formed around it. And now as we move into, our more modern or pre-modern era, where we saw the Industrial Revolution or the consumerization of certain things. So this is really kind of the dawn of the modern, globalized, capitalistic Western perspective. The rituals and behaviors around death kind of became a bit more commoditized as well.
Absolutely. I'm going to pull up here just some funeral services. Again, if this is too much for people, just close your eyes for a minute.
I know. I'm looking at the notes and I have a whole section on like torture and like we can skip that part.
But yeah, we've come a long way in terms of the way we approach the afterlife, death, post-mortem, however, it's looked at in culture over the years to something that's a bit more ceremonial and in remembrance. And obviously in a modern area, there's, a lot more ceremony around it. There's a lot of different ways to go about death as well and to celebrate and remember. And that's also led to a lot of, interesting technology, but also a very big industry too, that I think is really going to be kind of the highlight of this episode. And it'll be surprising to people to know how big death is, big tech, big health, big pharma, all that stuff. I'm going to call it big death because that's what it is. Just got some numbers here for you guys, but $35 billion industry in the US, expected to expand over the years. 40% of the market share of that is in the US, 30% in Europe, 20 in Asia, I think. So very big in the modern world. And then the global industry is about $189 billion globally, and expanding by 2030, which is crazy. But there's a reason why it's expanding, because people, I think, are more fascinated about the concept of death. Like there's a number of driving factors, some of them being demand for online and virtual funerals. Sounds weird, but new generations want different things. Design, and I hate to say this, fashion, but design and style around caskets and burials and tombs and plots is also a part of that industry. Cremation rates are incredibly high because they're generally cheaper than going through a ceremonial process. I think that's also probably due to a younger demographic starting to come in. Hello, welcome back everyone to another.
You're talking.
That's us.
That's us. Keep going. Sorry.
That's us on the pod at the same time. And yeah, there seems to be a huge cultural shift towards this idea of memorialization and remembrance. And so we'll also kind of get into some of the technologies, both good and bad, around, digital AI immortality, cryogenics. There's something called good trust that I want to dive into, but also things like assisted suicide devices, which are pretty scary. And there's a horrible story about that just recently, which we'll talk about as well. Anything I missed there, Sam, in regards to modern big death?
No, I mean, again, from the historical perspective, I think it's interesting. And I didn't do so much digging in terms of the research of like when we could say this began, but it's clear in terms of the Western relationship to death. We have always had, let's say, quite a disconnected relationship to it. If you spend time in other cultures, let's say in India and Varanasi or something, or a culture that has much more of a immersive experience in their society with kind of seeing it, participating in it, versus the Western perspective, where it's something that is not something that you're seeing on a day-to-day basis, and you actually don't spend a lot of time with the deceased unless you're, let's say, part of certain traditions like Catholic wake or sitting Shiva. and Jewish tradition, and I don't know the whole list of what people do, but yeah, it's a fairly recent thing. There are a number of organizations, industries, trade associations, lobbyist groups that formed at certain points in time, probably around the time that all of these groups formed at the dawn of industry, that participate in supporting this industry. And it's interesting to see the way that it is now evolving from something that was largely supported, let's say, by what would be considered big funeral. So the Funerals Directors Association. Hello, if anyone's watching, by the way. I've wonderful folks. I've met them. And, or even the florists, right? That industry is now kind of shifting, and it's moving into, now there are other players in this game. Technologists are coming into the picture, right from what we mentioned, either assisted suicide or euthanasia, or even some of these more futuristic, holographic, memorial service type things. So the landscape of the industry from that perspective is changing, of like, really, who are the players and what is the purpose, right? So the purpose before was largely memorializing or accepting sort of a natural fate or something like that. And now there are more questions that are coming up, which is around questions around bodily autonomy, which we have these debates across every aspect of society, right? It depends on what you're discussing, but in terms of this, that's where right to die has entered the discourse, and there are a bunch of players coming into this. Okay, do we want to get right into it? I guess we should get into the good stuff.
It's a good shift. Might as well.
All right.
A lot of people are probably familiar with this because it did circulate quite a bit on social media and in the news, but there's a company called Sarcopod, I believe, right? And it was based out of Switzerland, which is one of the few places in the world where I believe it is legal to get assisted suicide, loosely legal. And there was their first test case where there was a woman that did so. And it was kind of weird how they went about the process to do it, but it raised a lot of questions. And actually the Swiss police got involved and arrested a lot of people that supposedly were advocating or promoting her to do it. And it kind of leads into this question, Sam, we were talking about it before we started the stream a little bit, is some of the marketing components behind it. And I think some of the negative sides of big death, going this direction, one, right to die. That's, I think that's something that's going to be up to debate for quite a while. I mean, everyone should have control over their own body and their life and their choice to do what they want. But it gets a little misconstrued when you have potentially a company advocating for you to die or convincing you to do so. And then that's when you take a step back and you go, wait a minute, do I really want to do this? And it's kind of weird in this circumstance too, because this is the first time it's really been, I think, commercialized publicly, and it's sparked a tremendous debate.
Let's rewind. Okay, let's start from the beginning of the Sarco death pod. Will you pull up a picture of this thing? Just if you Google Sarcopod, not that one, the one that shows the full thing. And there's even a quote on the side of it from Carl Sagan. Some beautiful little, I don't know if he licensed
on the bottom.
He gave permission for his nice, optimistic, we're made of stardust quote to be put on the side of this thing. So for people who did not see this,
we are made of star stuff. We are a way for the universe to know itself.
That's a quote. Everyone likes that quote. That's a beautiful quote about, the universe and stuff. And it's okay, there's this death pod, the sarcopod. It's like a sarcophagus. And the idea, this inventor, he's an Australian guy, Philip Nietzsche. It sounds like Nietzsche. 74 years old, named Dr. Death, right?
Philip Nietzsche.
So he comes up with this idea where we can put someone in a death pod and fill it with nitrogen, therefore suffocating you because it's reducing the oxygen level that you need to survive. It sounds actually quite similar to other ways of killing people in the past, in gas chambers and such. But, the idea here is that it would be some sort of peaceful transition, like you float off into like la la land and then die. And from the tech perspective, for this death pod, and I laugh because it's so absurd, right? And
apparently they can be 3D printed at home as well.
That's the point. So how it's made. The idea that he had was he created, of course, the prototype and the blueprint. And his idea is to open source the blueprint of the death pod so that anyone could manufacture it, 3D print it at home or in their country. Which of course is a way to get around the fact that no one would manufacture this thing or want to touch it. Two, it's around this sort of libertarian decentralization open source idea, which I completely do support. However, what I thought of when I saw this was the concept of ghost guns, right? So in the debates around weapons often, or firearms, but if used nefariously, it becomes a weapon. We have a lot of examples or debates there of open source, right? CAD files, so the design file of a gun, or the design file of a drone, or the design file of anything that could be used to harm people. And
You're talking about the 3D printed ones, right?
3D printed guns are, called ghost guns in the sense that they're not manufactured by a licensed manufacturer. They don't have a serial number. They are not tracked or traced. Right. And this is a huge debate in terms of kind of the ethics of them. Should people be allowed to create their own anything, insert whatever there? I think as soon as it becomes a firearm, it's a question like, can you do this? But it's interesting that he's taking that approach with this like 3D printed sarcopod, and they did roll it out. So now we're getting back to the present, because this has been around, a number of groups, one of which is called Exit International. If you show their website, it looks like I don't know, like a 1990s, 1980s new age psychedelic type group. But
it kind of does.
Right. You usually show the website. You can go down and look at some of their resources and kind of dig into what they do. And there are a number of groups. I had found this group in the past when I was researching, another angle for euthanasia. But
they have a podcast too.
They have everything. They actually, so the most noticeable thing that they have is a $70 course. No, there's like, you can get this book.
They have a course?
No, there's a book you can buy, and it's a PDF, and it teaches you, I don't know if it's within the books, but it basically has, it almost feels like the Anarchist Cookbook, which was like a leaflet or book that went around that taught people how to make bombs. This basically is like, I probably shouldn't have even like mentioned that out loud. I don't know if I'm going to get booted off the internet for knowing about this stuff, but in this case, they give instructions. I didn't want to spend like $70 to this organization to read it, and I also didn't want to get it in unethical means, but I've seen these things. Gives instructions how to end your life with dignity. It gives instructions though how to support, like how to acquire the gas tanks, how to acquire certain like smelling salts, and all these crazy things, which to me feels like supporting a criminal enterprise at that point, because you can't actually get most of this stuff legally. So there's a bit of a gray area here also in terms of the kind of the ethics or supply chains of these devices, or again, the gases or the chemicals that are used to make them work. And they take a very open source perspective from it, which is you figure it out and you can do it. But in the case of what happened recently, this first test case of a woman, I guess there were claims that she didn't actually die within the supposed 7 to 15 minutes that it should take. And apparently, and I could be spreading misinformation now because I didn't really go into the details of it, but there was this, some people have been indicted around questions of if they helped her
Supposedly
along.
they did this like in the woods, like up by the border of Germany. Like, and it was very obscure, which was also another weird part about it. Like they didn't do it in a controlled building environment, hospital practice type setting. They just kind of threw it out there. Um, I don't know if that was the appeal of maybe that's how the woman wanted to go, but it just didn't feel very professional. If we're justifying the ethics, which I don't even know we should do, but it kind of comes back a little bit also to, I think, a deeper question of, you know, is this also a bit more manipulative at the same time? Because I think there is a big concern around mental health in society in general, especially in the US, which is probably why the death business is like 40% in the US, globally. But I think people, you know, when you're in a certain state of mind, you're more susceptible to those ideas. And I think when it becomes normalized, especially by a company that's generally probably being ran for profit and for revenue, you know, that's when the ethics come into play. Like, should this be happening? Is this manipulation? Is it almost like leaning towards more murder, I hate to say, than it is, you know, letting someone make a decision? Um, I don't know. It's just very questionable. It's hard to look at because, on one hand, you want to say, okay, you're an individual, you want to go a certain route in life. You know, who's I or you to say that you can't do that? But at the same time, when you monetize it, you have external factors and influence, you know, that could be further justifying something that maybe you wouldn't normally want to do. Um, and this is something that's going to be up for, I think, debate in society of whether or not we should allow this kind of stuff, or we should go the other direction. Like, should society promote wanting to live and feeling more at place in society and overcoming those mental hurdles that maybe you have, the things that make you have those ideations, rather than promoting them in the first place? You know, again, is something that will be of huge debate. But this is something that's definitely taken the internet, I think, by storm quite quickly lately. Um,
So on
yeah,
the
it's wild.
ethical side of euthanasia, right, was what we're talking about. And I was going down this whole rabbit hole, starting with the ancient Greeks and the debate on did Socrates, actually end it with hemlock versus get poisoned. And then we get to the more modern time. I guess it's attributed the combination of the word of more with Francis Bacon and our friend Karl Marx, who always loves to show up in all these things with these Marxist ideas. I'm like, of course, this person was involved in coining this word or bringing it back into the modern discourse. And really, the idea, and this is again a bit of like pre-modern, postmodern history, is saying people deserve to die with dignity. This is like where this is coming from in the same period where a lot of other ideas are coming about, of critiques of modern industrial society and the capitalists in quotes. So we're looking here, MIT Technology Review article that's taking that ethical quandary even further to like the extreme that we're at this moment, not the furthest extreme of the future, but even where we are today, where we have artificial intelligence or intelligent systems that are capable of taking a data input and making a decision on that. Yet we don't have a high degree of knowing how these are designed, right? You can compare three different models. I'm sure most people at this point in time watching this show have probably interacted with a large language model or a chat bot at this point, whether it's Google Gemini or Chat GPT or Microsoft Copilot. I'm pretty sure, confident, right? And you would know that these things are giving totally different feedback, right? And they're designed on based on its designers or architects' bias. So the question is, when we start putting ethical questions, so if you were to have an AI making a decision of should you live or die, or should you pull the plug or not on your family member, should you end your life because you're struggling with a bout of seemingly insurmountable depression, these types of things. You have to understand what are the motives of the design behind the program, and what could it be telling you and why. Does the program believe that we have an overpopulation crisis, in which case it might be incentivized to tell you to end it all?
See,
Or does
that's
it
where it gets a little scary to have AI involved, because we don't know what the AI would decide
I
is right or wrong. But at the same time, AI today in its basic form as an LLM has a lot of intrinsic biases, unfortunately, and we've seen that in ChatGPT and Gemini and some others. And you don't know how those things can play out over time as these machines continue to learn and compile data, what it might apply that to. And if we were to say, okay, I'm going to use AI to help me make that critical decision, that could be a little scary as well.
but people already are, in terms of their personal medical journeys. I've seen on the
Oh yeah.
positive side a lot of very intriguing examples of individuals learning how to not diagnose themselves, but navigate the modern medical system, inputting their medical data. Even myself, I had a recent sort of medical journey, we'll call it that, and I had an intuition, but also because of the internet and because of some of these tools, was able to combine a lot of disparate parts and get a indication of a direction. But I think the problem is then, we fast forward 5-10 years and people have become so reliant in the way that we are on a search engine and trusting that information, that we trust this sidekick. And we ask a very vulnerable question and trust its answers. And when we start talking again about these things that I personally don't think they fall in the domain of really like a human question. I don't think we should really be making those decisions. I tend to leave it up to what's meant to be. But again, I look, like, have the belief that if someone wants to make a decision with what to do with their life and their body, they can do that. I worry about a society that starts to normalize the behavior, in this case, normalizing making euthanasia or assisted suicide. And these are two, I guess, slightly different concepts, right? And there's a range between, well, for what purpose, right? Is it okay if you're in tremendous physical pain, or is it mental pain and anguish, which a lot of cases recently have centered around mental anguish or psychological anguish, which, not to discount that, right? That is very painful. But these are also often the most vulnerable people in society. And if you have an entire group of organizations, whether they're medical professionals or the support professionals, saying one of your possible treatment options, and the use of the language treatment option, which this is basically, in my opinion, against the Hippocratic Oath. But anyways, right? If say you have major depressive disorder, you're never going to recover from it, and you have all these other things. So this is it. In the case of a recent example that reached a high level of profile, Zoraya Terbeek in the Netherlands. She's a younger woman in her 20s and struggled with a bunch of conditions, and basically had gotten to this point where the physician or supporting care team was like, you don't really have any other options, but this isn't a treatment option. And it's like, okay, so you can kill yourself. And again, I don't that was her decision, but there was quite a bit of uproar on all the reaches of the internet here, in terms of right to die and ethics, and every end of the spectrum of people should be able to do what they want and die with dignity, to the more religious ends of the spectrum that are saying we need to protect our most vulnerable. And now what we're discussing here, which is just generally, what does it mean for a society that could potentially I'm more concerned about the other interests involved here. So not so much the overarching philosophical ethical question, which is also something we could discuss for 10 days straight. But
Forever. I mean,
yeah.
I'm sure I could come up with an argument both ways a million times over, and I've already got a bunch in my head, but it's going to be debated no matter what. It's not something that'll get decided anytime soon. The biggest fear I have, I think, two, one being the quality of it. Like, we don't know exactly what happened with that woman that decided she wanted to do that in Switzerland. We don't know if it was agonizing. We don't know if she really struggled for her life and she wanted to change her mind, or if it was painful. Like, if someone really wants to go through that, don't you want them to have the most peaceful, go to sleep, be in peace, kind of experience, if that were ever to be the circumstance? I that becomes a little bit of a scary thought as well. Like, was she like not, in a good position there? And then the other, big pharma is very aggressive with advertising in the medical space. And I worry it becoming more legalized in certain countries. Like, are you going to watch TV and you're like, man, I'm not feeling well. I'm feeling pretty depressed. Life has been hard the last few years. And then all of a sudden you see Sarcopod commercials with all the side effects at the bottom, but you can't read it that fast. It just says, sign up today for your consultation. Like, it scares me because there's like, where's the boundary where we mediate and we say, hey, let's take a step back and let's ask how you're feeling. Let's try and find some positive solutions. Let's let that be like the last resort. Let's not just, make it be a dollar figure and you can do it. Because I think there's a lot of people that truly don't want that to happen. And you think of situations, people that I've admired growing up that have, unfortunately taken their lives, like Mac Miller, loved Mac Miller, Robin Williams, like people that just horrendously sad cases where in a different circumstance, maybe they would have come out of that a better person if they had the help they needed and the support. And at the same time, is that the best way to go if that's truly what they wanted to do? Um, and I think about that a lot when this topic comes up. And it's like, I know that there's a lot of people, that probably aren't unsure about it, and you don't want to convince them to do something. Rather, you want to give them every option possible first to live, I think. But at the same time, there's a lot of people that I think just don't know. They're under the influence of drugs. They're upset. Life is hard. Maybe mentally they're struggling. It's a very multifaceted, I think, debate that needs to be had before, just throwing the commercials out there and saying, hey, sign up today.
Yeah. I mean, I would not want to see the day where this death pod is marketed. It likely will be more of they probably would just make a pill. That's what they've been doing now. You just get a combination of some pills and mash them up yourself, and a nurse administer. Well, they can't administer it. You drink your own Kool-Aid. But yeah, well, first of all, again, I reiterate on this point for anyone watching this, that if you're struggling, there's always someone to call. One of us, call me, call the hotline. But there is a suicide hotline. There are these things, and plenty of people who volunteer their time to support people in need. And I would love to see our society continue to support each other in these types of ways, in ways saying that you are worthy. And I'm, again, not discounting people's depth of suffering. I can only know my own and not that of my neighbors. But it is problematic, right? If we start to shift our perspective, and by we, I mean society as a whole, of seeing this as a solution, creating the technology to support it. And this is just one technology, right? Like, throughout history, and we didn't get into this of like death technology throughout all of time because it's quite dark, and I don't really, we don't need to go through all these like medieval torture devices. But there are a few examples where certain technologies were used, and there is an ethical debate around it. One that I have often either heard cited or even cited myself in terms of, let's say, technology ethics discussions or speeches was post World War One, and I can't, off the top of my head remember specifically his name, but the individual who invented fertilizer, but nitrogen was the chemical compound in fertilizer. Will you bring it up?
It still is.
Yes, it is. But so World War One, right? We're coming out of Europe is coming out of World War One. They're on the brink of famine, and basically the invention of this incredible technology, fertilizer, it brings them out of starvation and famine across the country, the continent. And
I think it's this guy. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I will know if I see his face. Yes, that's him. Is he Franz?
The inventor of Bosch
Fritz.
too?
Yeah, it's Fritz. Oh, he was Bosch too? Oh no, I don't. Sorry,
Inventor
Bosch.
of Haber Bosch. Process of method used to manufacture nitrogen fertilizer. Yeah, same guy, Fritz Haber.
Fritz Haber. Cool guy. He's actually
makes great power tools, by the way.
Jewish heritage. And, I think leaves Germany or is educated in Germany. I forget the story. It's been a while since I've gone down the Fritz rabbit hole. But so invents fertilizer. But that same process and that same use of chemicals, fast forward to World War II, and you have the Holocaust and the final solution in these things. And in that chemicals were actually used in the...
Yeah, I won't pull up photos on that one.
the gas chambers, right? And I actually visited Auschwitz this past summer. I spent some time in Poland. I did.
What was that like?
And it was heavy. And it was something, it was actually quite bizarre in that it has been turned into, of course, a museum and memorial, but there's a global audience for this. And there are a lot of people who don't actually share, from parts of the world that don't kind of share this narrative of history in a way and didn't respect it in the same way. So it almost felt a bit like, for some people, like Disney World, like they were selling popcorn and stuff. And meanwhile, my tour group was like crying. So it was very poignant and profound. But, like when you think of the Germans at the time, and the Nazis were so proud of the technologies that they had invented to make more efficient the process of killing, exterminating, and disposing of people, right? And again, I'm sorry if this is dark, but this is from a technology ethics perspective. Like, the person who invented fertilizer that fed millions of people was the same person who helped then create a technology that was used in a wartime state to exterminate millions of people of his own ethnicity as well, and others. And so it was, again, an often cited example. Other examples were, around the time of the invention of electricity. Someone was accidentally, like a plumber or drunken individual, accidentally electrocuted. And then someone was like, this would be a great idea to create the electric chair. Maybe this would be a more ethical way to end people's lives. And of course, this is in the discussion of capital punishment, which is a different use of technology to kill. And we don't, and then there's the whole question of war, right? Wartime and those tools. But now we're seeing this shift into like an individual's own decision to end their life. And so this is a kind of a different thing. It's not someone choosing to do that to you. But again, we can imagine that there will be, with every new technology, I'm sure people will come up with new ways to both extend life with it or end life with it. That's just sort of the way that things are. And not to say any new technology predict that people will try to kill people with it, but we see it already, right? So you have this combination in this death pod, sarcopod. Sorry, I don't I don't really want to normalize it, but you've got a really kind of cool combination of things going on with 3D printing. Now there's the questions of putting AI into it to like optimize that process. And to me, I'm just sitting there like, who puts any energy into this when we should be creating I don't know, use that to create a better hyperbaric oxygen chamber to help people recover from brain injuries. Use that to help to research how you can use that chamber to help people recover from um, mental illness that they're struggling with that's making them want to end it. So who are the people and what are their incentives and where is the money coming from that is behind the guise of dignity saying that we should do more of this? And
Doesn't it feel like a Black Mirror episode? Like sometimes I see the news and I'm like, what timeline am I in?
I didn't sign up to be in this timeline clearly, but I did. I'm surprised there isn't a Black Mirror episode about this. They were spot on with a number of other topics, which we have as our next one, and we
Mhm.
could maybe segue into that now, which is this idea of once you have died,
Yeah.
depending on how you've done it, the idea
Yeah,
of
couple of final thoughts on it.
okay.
Yeah, one, don't be afraid of, using fertilizer. It's okay. I mean, a lot of the great things in tech we have today have come from people that were involved in the final solution. Unfortunately, Operation Paperclip led to a lot of modern advancements, such as your microwave. So be guilty about your microwave and power tools.
Mm,
It's just the way life is. But I think Big Death, it's weird, scary, and awkward to talk about, but it's also something that isn't all doom and gloom. I think it's something that can also be in some ways very helpful too. And that's kind of where AI, does come into the picture in a different limelight, in things like memorializing people and your presence and allowing something to live on, to have legacy, heritage, something you can pass on other than just, money and property, isn't another actual cool aspect. I'm going to pull up here too, that I think will be explored a lot more in the future. There we go, trying to multitask. Like there's companies like Rememory and stuff like that. There's other like holographic solutions people are working on, different like AI personality copies, ways for someone to find ways, in a sense, to live on for their family, their friends, for a legacy. Um, and I think is, pretty cool. There's also another thing called Good Trust, and they do this thing called a digital vault. Let me see if I can pull that up too real quick. Good Trust, multitasking at its finest. Do 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 do. There's a company called Good Trust, and they have something called Digital Vault. And what they do is they allow you to take your online presence that you've put out there on social media, websites, businesses, accounts, YouTube, messaging, things like that, and they preserve it for you so that you have an online presence that's, always there. So, I mean, people think about legacy in, I think, many different ways and circumstances, but I think it's kind of cool because we live in an age where it doesn't have to be, what do you write on your tombstone and what's in your will, and what do people just, remember off the top of their head about you, but you can preserve something. One day, my great grandkids will be able to say, great great grandfather Brandon was a podcaster, and there's all his episodes. We can watch them. I think there's a beauty and a levity to that within the death business.
Yeah, I mean, I'm crazy. I probably would be like, there's a multi-sig wallet that unlocks a pirate treasure map, and you're gonna go on a 3 generation long
I've
extravaganza
had
around
so
this
many jokes
planet.
about that.
I already started. I mean, like I joke, but it's seriously. I mean, I hope I don't pass on too soon before my plans are ready. But eh, that technology is cool, and especially with the original thing they're doing, which is like wills and estate planning, especially when you're talking about like crypto or new forms of money and how to protect that and how to transfer that, especially
Mhm.
for generations that might not know how how to receive that or transfer it. I think it'll be really interesting what we could do, not just with the transfer of money between generations, but as you mentioned, like legacy, intellectual property, fun games, fun, like again, just speaking from my experience, the part of me that would live on, I could care less about people getting to know. Well, some people in the past, the legacy was their art or their contribution to society, or nothing. Maybe they didn't really want to leave something behind, their legacy, their children. I mean, for me, it would be like, yeah, some super whimsical game experience that people would get to experience, like the essence of the design behind it. But again, yeah, I think I like that you're bringing this in a direction that is lighthearted and that we can use these tools in a way to memorialize people in new ways that isn't creepy, right? Because
Sure.
this is the
I mean, it could become a bit creepy. There's some avenues here, but
like
it is something that is generally, I think, positive, but who knows what direction
I
AI
mean,
goes.
Sam Rad's deepfake should not be persisting after my, on the same very couch where she was created. That sounds weird, but not in that way. She was also on this video. Like, I think those things are a little questionable. And there was, going back to Black Mirror, when you had mentioned that one of the most famous episodes, I think in the first season in 2013, it's called Be Right Back. And it was this, the premise of the episode is that I think the boyfriend, it was a couple, and he passed away. And so there was this service that was able to consume all of his online footprint, the social media footprint, the images, every conversation he'd ever had, and create first and foremost like a virtual deepfake of this person that was, for all purposes, the person that she had lost. And I think as the episode goes on, I don't want to give too many spoilers, but and then the technology advances and he becomes more and more embodied, right? So that you end up having basically the physical form of this person. Is it this person or an emulation? And this was 2013. So we're over 10 years later now. And I think it's an everyday occurrence we can build this, like not the physical embodiment, but very much could clone a likeness, a voice, and train an algorithm or fine tune a model based on someone's journals or someone's online social media presence in a way that would probably feel to the other person similar to the person they'd lost. And the question I ask there, beyond just ethics, is what is the health and psychological well-being, and what is this for the person, like for a society that does this? We already saw, I mean, from the dawn of basically social media, before we started doing any of this crazy stuff, one of the big questions for researchers was like, humans are hardwired to forget. What is it going to mean for us in a world where we are not allowed to forget or unable to forget? What does it mean for us when we were, or at least in the past, you would maybe interact with someone one time and never see them again, not follow them on Instagram for the next 5 years, or, have a relationship and that relationship ends, or lose a loved one and then go through a grief process that would create a distance between that person or that experience. And we now live in a world where you have to actively create that distance. So
you've seen Harry Potter, right?
Yes.
When is a perfect example of this, actually. In the final book as well, when he walks out to his death and he finds that he has the resurrection stone, and it brings back his family and close friends and the people that mattered most to him, but they weren't like really there. Like they were like ephemeral, like they were like this ghost-like kind of presence, like kind of there, but it's not the same. And there's kind of a part in the movie where they were talking about it as well, and why in the lore of the triangle thing, what's it called? God, I can't remember.
We're talking Harry Potter. What are we talking?
All the Harry Potter nuts are going to be pissed at me. So is my mom. But there's the wands, there's the cloak, and then there's the resurrection stone, and death
the Horcrux.
No, the oh, this is so bad. Wait. um, the Deathly Hallows. Okay,
Oh, okay.
the Deathly Hallows. So there's the wand that's supposed to be able to like conquer death, and then there's the cloak that allows you to hide and escape death, and then there's the resurrection stone that allows you to recall people that have been claimed by death. And the reason why death created all of them was to trick those individuals into being caught by death eventually. But the resurrection stone in particular, the reason why that worked is because even though you could bring people back to life that were to dead previously, it wasn't quite the same. They weren't the same person. Like there's pieces that just aren't there, and it felt depressing and unreal, and it made them want to take their own life. And it's an interesting take on that, actually, because I think that it could be something that is a problem one day. Like if we have these AI hologram like ways to bring people back, essentially, um, does that make you feel more depressed? Like, does that get into the back of your mind to the point where you feel like nothing is real, like nothing, there's no point whatsoever? I could see that scenario playing out for a lot of people, and maybe that leading to more sarcopod signups, unfortunately. But it's an interesting narrative because we've seen that played out in Hollywood, in film, in books a number of times.
Do you think so my head is spinning now, my little entrepreneur brain that is like, or hacker brain. Like, do you think there would be a group of people or a mindset or an industry that would form that would help people to remove them, like prevent themselves from being immortalized in these digital or physical ways if they didn't want it and didn't give them permission? I'm thinking back to Coachella 2012, where
And
we
Tupac?
see Tupac's hologram
I got it.
come out on stage. Good. Yeah, we're telepathic today. This is good. Right.
Guys,
So
it's not Tupac, I promise.
Tupac comes back from the dead. He's resurrected. He's got that stone. And no, I mean, so there are a whole saga here in terms of intellectual property lawsuits after this. But it basically, in Coachella Music Festival 2012, so right around this time of the Black Mirror episode 2013, everyone's kind of playing with this concept: holograms, deep fake, AI wasn't yet in the discourse again, but the hologram of Tupac comes out and performs, and it's obviously not him.
Mhm.
Then there's questions around the rights to the money made off of that performance, and there have been a number of such examples after that. But imagine now a world where that's not just some like novelty thing that happens on stage, and there are lawyers and entertainment lawyers and people who have kind of structured ownership of one's identity or intellectual property around it. Or even people like me who've gone so far as to do that for myself as an experiment, like structure Samrad as an entity that cannot be taken. Hopefully not after death, but like, will we have businesses, an entire industry that helps people cease to exist?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's kind of a dystopian future, but like, what could be done in the future with someone's likeness or intellectual property without their permission because they're dead?
I think this is where the tech itself can also play a positive role, because if you're able to find a way to preserve and lay out your IP after death and where that goes and who has control over it and what's to happen with it, then you have a little bit of a way to fight back against what can be done regardless. Like there are plenty of people that can rip off your identity today and that can create fake versions of you. Deep fakes are a very, very real reality now, and they're getting more and more common and better and better. And that'll happen after death too. And if, after death, you don't have a plan, I mean, what's going to stop them from carrying it on if no one really knows that your presence isn't there on the internet of, multi millions of people? So I think having something there to protect your IP and your identity, your values, your work, the things you do online, your presence, is going to be a very important factor. And there's definitely a business, I think, there that's justified and that is ethical. Because there's a yin and a yang to it, like with just about every technology and every industry out there. So on that side of it, I think I'm, very pro, you should think about that and you should leverage that to have a plan when that time comes. It's more of a
Yes.
legacy thing, more of a heritage thing. Like, what do you want to carry on? And you don't want that to be distorted or diluted either by people saying, oh, well, Brandon's not here anymore. Sam's not here anymore. Let's, carry on their podcast in a completely different version. Like, wait a minute, maybe that should be someone else's right to decide.
Yeah, your own. I mean, it's I long for the simpler times where you, if you were lucky of prominence, got a headstone with maybe a quote on it. If you were lucky, right? Most people were not kind of
Yeah, if you had
even
wealth back then, yeah,
given
you got
that. So
the headstone, you got the plot.
I suppose the new form of, let's say, wealth or privilege, or people that would be thinking about these things, and it shouldn't be a privilege, right? It should be everyone. We should be thinking about this for everyone, but usually things start from the top with of this nature. I do think this is a huge opportunity, and it's not even that there are questions at this point of should we or shouldn't we. We have to, when we're talking about finding new protocols, or I guess establishing new standards for identity in a way that preserves privacy, right? Because you can kind of walk a fine line between this digital, like authoritarian digital ID system, or a privacy preserving alternative to, let's say, some sort of like likeness, fingerprint, social security number combo that then does attach to the intellectual property or the wishes of things you want to do in the future, the transfer of money with smart contracts in a blockchain term or something else, right? Some intelligent system that is programmed by you. It would need to be post-quantum compatible, as in
Probably.
it's probably not a blockchain. The one that we've seen, it would be, I call
There are some
yes.
post-quantum resistant
Good,
blockchains.
good. This
So
is what we
it
need.
is being worked on way ahead of time. So I'm very bullish on what blockchain can do. And it could
Yes.
be a crucial part of this.
Even back in the day when we are like 2014, I remember meeting some of the smartest people. These were like, building, the ones who built the ones that you would know. And they were already on to post-quantum encryption then. So I was like, good, thank you. I'm glad that like smart people are working on this. But again, I'm optimistic about, on one hand, I don't want to live in a world where this is necessary. I really want and prefer to be in some sort of fantasy land where we wouldn't do this type of stuff, like steal someone's identity on a podcast once they've passed away for your own gain. But unfortunately, there will always be bad actors. And if this is the state of things, then there's a lot of really cool stuff we can do to progress forward from like a human society perspective, as well as a technological perspective, for us to navigate this new world. And I think we can have some fun with it as well, and not just have it so utilitarian. And certainly, again, right, even with the debate of the previous discussion on euthanasia, if it is someone's right to choose what to do with their physical life or body, it would be someone's right to do what they want with their digital memorialization or their physical memorialization, right? The question then becomes like, what is the norm in society? What happens? And there won't be one norm. There will be different places, cultures, belief systems, as there always have been. So it will be interesting. Like, I don't know. I try to always imagine these things, take a little field trip to the future in my mind. And I'm like, okay, let's go 20 years from now. What does that look like? Like, are we in the internet graveyard with like thousands of deep fakes of people who cease to exist, or people who never existed in the first place? And does it really matter at that point? And then what does that mean, though, about the sanctity of life? And do we have new things that emerge that we what are the new values that emerge in that world? Are you more physical or not? Meanwhile, we have this like undercurrent of which we've talked about a number of times on other episodes, and we probably will continue to, because it's such a big through line, is the longevity movements and biohacking, but really the fact that people are living longer and will be able to live longer. And we have individuals that are, on one hand, we're talking about this episode on death tech and that death will exist. And then there are some belief systems or groups that are, trying to eliminate it or treat it as if it's some sort of disease that can be conquered. And I'm not, I don't know if that is possible, but definitely a bold concept. So,
and for those that maybe don't want to die, but maybe are, on the verge or foresee it coming, maybe they're dealing with something. We can't not talk about Walt Disney, and we cannot not talk about cryogenics for a second. A topic that's just always fun, seeing how billionaires are constantly pursuing it. But it's one of those things. It's like a pseudoscience. It's not necessarily something that's disproven. It could potentially be done. It's just never been proven to be able to be done. Like, it's something that's always been like in the realm of science fiction. Like in Star Wars, for example, when Han Solo is in the block of whatever, and he's like frozen solid, and wanting to freeze yourself and wake up in 100 years in a different reality. There's like a SpongeBob episode about that with like Squidward. He like froze himself and woke up in the future too. But I mean, I think it's something that's also going to be part of this industry. It's not necessarily the procurement of death itself, but maybe ways to bypass it temporarily until there's a solution. And that seems to be a very tantalizing space for a lot of people. Like, if you're dealing with an ailment and maybe you think, I can't cure this today, but in 20, 30 years, maybe there will be a cure for it, or there'll be a solution for it. Is there a solution where you could go to sleep and wake up like in a hyperbaric chamber? I think it's a fun topic. It's not something that's in science today. It's something that's like, people claim they can do it. They say they can do it. There's a lot of study on it, but I think it will be a reality at some point. I really do. I think we're getting closer.
I mean, it kind of is in science, though. My head is going again into a different direction of like another form of life on the other end. So I was just Googling the longest time a human embryo has been frozen. So a fertilized egg. And so in the fertility or that space, and the results coming up are, this someone born after being frozen 20 years. And again, so this is when it's just an embryo, but it's looking like 30 years. Right. So maybe some of the indications of what will happen at end of life is going to happen at the beginning of life. And I mean, the ethics of all of this, right? And this is where it's like, you almost can't have conversations about it without getting in fights with everyone. And myself, I fight for fun, and it's a loving debate. It's my love language. But like, there are groups that wouldn't even ask about the ethics of it. It's clear that, let's say, human embryos in that industry or that lobby can indefinitely extend life that has just began or not began yet. So I think the tools there will probably inform the tools here on cryogenics at other forms of life, like the full body that's been grown. There's no reason that if a cell at a multicellular but like very small level cannot be preserved in depending on when people decide when consciousness begins. And we don't yet have that understanding through science, but there's no reason that it is not possible for of course, I'm not a scientist and like freezing things and defrosting human bodies.
It gets really into the weeds of the science, but this is kind of why people think that it's still possible, including a lot of people that are studying it. You can't just freeze someone, put them in the freezer, and they're, going to be good until 100 years later, because the cells in your body have water, and
Mm.
water naturally expands when it's frozen. Your cells will burst, and there's no way to bring you back if your cells are dead. But there is a lot of techniques being studied where you can undergo a similar process without bursting those cells. And that's one of those key aspects to preserve the integrity of the body itself. And then the other portion of that is the mental state too. Like, how do you preserve the mind so that the mind is also in a dormant state, but is not like in a state of decay or rupturing? There's a lot of science being done and studies being done on that. And again, I think we're getting very close. There's a chicken that's actually very famous that was frozen on accident and was thawed and came back to life. Have you ever seen that?
Yeah.
The chicken?
It's, I
I gotta
come
find
from
that
like
chicken.
this human anthropologist like perspective where I think everything is just absurd and ridiculous that human beings do, and I love it. It's like I am a human being and I think it's funny to observe, but I wonder with all of these things, it's always whether we're talking longevity or death, and death is such an interesting topic because it's the fundamental existential frontier, consciousness, but really death being the absence or end. I don't, depending on beliefs, right? But
Yeah.
from a scientific perspective, the absence of or end of, and it's something that's caused, there's a lot of mystery, there are a lot of belief systems there, and I just wonder, is the drive, like the motivation for people to do this, to invent these things? I tend to feel that the motivation for almost all inventions is this fundamental questioning of what does it mean to be a human? What are we doing here? What happens when we're not here? How do we stop that from happening? Like that kind of feels like the line of questioning that has led to a lot of things, or power. How do we kill the people that are going to kill me? But it's all existential in nature, life or death. And I just wonder what the similarities are of the cultures, the various cultures that, going back to when we talked about, mummification in the Egyptians. And now we're looking at cryogenics, which is like sort of mummification, like a different version, but it's coming from the same perspective of like, how do we help this person transition or prevent a transition better through these technologies? I don't know. I mean, like, again, I keep wondering the why. I don't know. Would you freeze yourself?
I don't know if I'd freeze myself. I think, to quote Yoda,
Mm.
death is a natural part of life.
Yes. Okay.
And that's the philosophy. I think I'm just going to live by it. Now, when it comes to, again, legacy, heritage, the people you care about, wanting to leave something tangible behind, that's something else. I'd say, yeah, of course I want to do that. I want to create a YouTube video that comes out every single year for the next 100 years. And so people can feel like I'm still there until they pass. Or maybe I want to leave some type of recording behind or some things. Maybe we'll get to the point where I can clone a portion of my personality. I know you've worked on this, Sam, a little bit.
Yeah, I'm gonna put her into a dog.
I think it would be a great part of like the grieving process for a lot of people to feel like you're not there anymore, but there's a part of you that wanted to remain just for those people. I think is kind of special to think about. And I'm cool with that. Like, that's something I might explore. But in terms of conquering death itself, like, I look at it as the next great journey. I don't want to think about, trying to bypass that. If there's a way for me to live an extra 100 years, maybe I'll think about it. But I don't think death is something to cheat either. Again, this is to everyone else's opinion. This is my own, full discretion. But I think that's just how I look at it at the end of the day. Death is a big topic. People have been fascinated about it for thousands of years. It's always been a topic of discussion, and it's based in every culture and religion and foundation and philosophy on what happens next. What do we do next? Where do we go? Is it right? Is it wrong? Is it good? Is it bad? It's in myth. It's in lore. I think it's a natural thing to explore, including in the sciences. Even if it gets to the point it's a little unethical, we're going to push it naturally because we're human. And I think one of the biggest, most important things about being human is our curiosity and just learning when we should take a step back from that curiosity. But again, this is a big industry. It's only going to get bigger and bigger. I think the biggest takeaway for people is to realize that it exists and that it's going to continue to expand, and to just have a really good foundation of what you want and what's important to you. And what this is going to look like for, I think, for a lot of people. Like we talked about the sarcopods and the AI digital afterlife memoriams, and the way people are investing into their post-mortem selves. And it's going to be a very firm reality for a lot of people in the future. I think more so because of how interconnected the world is today and how much people want to leave legacy. And it's affordable. It's more accessible than it used to be in the past. Talk about tombstones, right? It used to be very expensive to get a tombstone with 5 words on it and pick out the best plot in your state. Now anyone could feasibly do it, throw it on blockchain, attach an NFT to it, lose your seed phrase, and it's good.
I like what you mentioned about the human elements of all of this. And I tend to believe that there's a bit of, let's say, of course, ego plays into everything for all of us. We do have an ego. We can't fully have ego death and still
Everyone has an ego.
survive as being a human entity here. But I think, again, what's behind a lot of these things, and I ask these provocative questions to myself all the time, like, what if people knew? I'm not saying this is the case. I'm just a hypothetical question, thought experiment. Like, what if death wasn't the end? Would they behave differently? Would we do any of these things? And would it disrupt this whole industry or this framework and this money that exists around fear of it, preparing for it, navigating it, ending it, sooner? What if there was more beyond? Or what if there was trust in more beyond? I made a joke. This is actually, like, you'll learn how effed up I am and cynical, but I had to do, like, I don't know, you do like directives, things like this for family, like a medical directive or estate planning. I mean,
Yeah.
at some point people should do this. I highly recommend seeking a lawyer, and even if you, but especially if you have children or a home or things. And I was writing this really crazy letter because I didn't really make like a full game for people to play of if I were to pass, but it was like joking, like, of clearly, if you're reading this, I'm dead. I will communicate to you through Morse code, through the lights. You will know what I'm saying and where I've visited you. And anyone who knows me probably...
You could really get into someone's head.
No,
I will be communicating to you through gravity.
Look for the signs. You'll know that it's me. Wink, wink, from our secret codes. I mean, I hope that anyone who is one of my loved ones wouldn't go completely unhinged, believe like, oh, she's visited. But okay, so this is actually an area that I would be very curious to see research in. And of course, there's a lot of research with DMT and kind of traversing, understanding consciousness, traversing other dimensions. But there have been some studies, and I don't think they exist quite yet publicly, but maybe they will with some of this technology. If the fundamental drive for inventing death pods is a belief that you can expedite it, but really a wanting to end human suffering type thing, it would be kind of cool if maybe there were things that we started to invent and look at that allowed us to explore or traverse these other perspectives or realms. I'm not saying that there's anything to it, but it would be quite a provocative concept if someone was like, oh, dead Samrad actually did communicate to us from the afterlife through the light bulbs. Like, I'm not saying it would be so so literal like that, but you know, and some of the more esoteric fields or mediumship or some of the other these types of belief systems.
I'd create my own board game. It'd be like a Ouija board, but like for
Is that how I'm
talking to me.
it would be
But I'd
the
have this like IoT light setup, Ouija board like esque style, and that I'll talk to you through the Govee lights, and you just
yes.
set up an app, and AI me will communicate with you through Morse code in the Govee lights in the room. There's something
People
crazy like
will
that.
do this in this because literally I was going to design this as part of my fun death game. And then was like, no one, this is really psychotic behavior. And I
A
won't
little bit.
but it's more like I have these whimsical techie future ideas all the time and filter most of them out. Of course, I don't stand on a stage and like tell people that's the future of death tech. But I think when we think about the future on the fringes, right? Because what we discussed today or tonight is not, it sounds fringy to talk about some of these things. And the fact that it's not just shows how far we've come in terms of science fiction becoming science fact, or things that ended up in a dystopian television show, or Harry Potter books being quite like real and relevant today. So when we think of like outside the bound of reality today, I don't think it is. There will be people who run these types of experiments, and then there's a question of what does it mean for humanity and human belief systems, scientific, philosophical, ethical, religious, um, right? And what does that mean for the way that people organize or agree or disagree with each other? Because these ideas are quite provocative. And, you know, for me, myself, I'm similar to you with this Yoda quote. It's not that I want that, you know, it's an inevitable transition that we all share and experience. And I'm a bit more of a naturalist when it comes to these things, and have such a reverence for humanity and the human experience and the full range of it too, including suffering. And that's something that I find so beautiful, and it takes a lot for any of us to sit through. I can't imagine, right, some of the levels of physical or mental anguish that people experience, but I can tell you for sure that all of us do. I think that is a part of what we're all here. We all experience the full range of, again, emotions, sensations, experiences. And I would love to live in a future where we celebrate that. And not to say celebrate suffering, but there, you know, depending on, again, whatever ideology or I've spent way too much time researching every possible spiritual and religious tradition. So there are some commonalities, a lot of them, despite what certain people, you know, they want to infight and argue more. I think there is a common condition, which is suffering, and running away from is something that if we could continue to like embrace more and learn the lessons from, versus saying like, here are the keys to your nitrogen sarcopod. Enjoy your journey, with this Carl Sagan quote, because you're just stardust. I don't know. I don't know if that's really the most optimistic viewpoint for the future. I actually think a more optimistic one would to say like we have these experiences, and let's create healthy ways for us to connect with ourselves and each other through these experiences, and not just sort of cheapen it by escaping. Death being the final escape, right? We escape all day long. We also build technologies. You know, you can use this thing to escape all day long. You can use, I don't think I can escape with water, but you know, like we drink, we do all sorts of things. But you know, the final escape, maybe we could try to use our ingenuity to embrace the human experience more.
To quote Dylan Thomas, I think is a better quote on the
Mm.
death on the industry than the Carl Sagan one. You know, rage against the dying of the light. Don't go gentle into that good night. I think you should fight to live and enjoy your life as much as possible, because what comes after that is inevitable. We're all going to pass one day. We're all going somewhere. We don't know where it is. We don't know what that adventure will be like. It is the next great thing after, but the only thing you really know and can have control of is today and tomorrow potentially. So I think that's what you should always strive for. At least that's what I'm going to do, especially in a death business is getting bigger and bigger. It's pretty crazy. But I got to jump to a late night meeting here in about 10 minutes. So we'll have to wrap up this episode, but it has been a fantastic subject. I think we covered a lot of things that are very intriguing, and a topic that is, I think, very interesting for a lot of people, that can generate a lot of thought-provoking ideas and controversies, and there'll be a lot of debate that comes out of it. I think this was a fantastic episode. So people out there listening, watching now and in the future, definitely leave your thoughts in the comments. I think we'd both love to know what else is happening in this industry, maybe that we didn't cover or that might develop over time. So definitely come back to this episode and make sure to give it a like, make sure to subscribe. And there'll be a lot of debate. And we're back on the pod on the pod.
I don't know why it's like, it's very meta. It's playing us.
Any final thoughts, Sam, before we wrap it up?
No. Thanks for coming. And I hope that we brought a balance of optimism and healthy realism to this debate. I think most of the topics that we want to bring forth on this show, as we say, are the most pressing and provocative questions of our time. So please do comment or reach out to Brandon or myself with provocative questions that you have for us, for episode ideas, or even just like to get into things in the comments.
Absolutely. Take care, guys. Have a great evening, and we'll see you guys all in the next episode. We'll decide what that is pretty soon, but I think we got a couple lined up, some good topics. So see you guys in the next one. Have a great evening.